welcome everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to opportunities I have to speak at Utah Valley University. Long before we did anything with the business school, my family has always been huge supporters of this school. We really admire the fact that Utah Valley University is doing more, in our opinion, in the state to educate this state's population than any other university. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to be here. So as Tom mentioned, I work for Woodbury Corporation. You may be familiar with us, but we're at this stage a 99-year-old family company, founded in 1919. We're all trying not to jinx it. I don't think you'll find anybody in the family that will say, hey, let's just round up to 100 because we got 11 months to go and we want to make sure we make it the next 11 months. It would be a real shame if something happened that caused us to go down this year. But we're excited to get to 100 years. That's a really neat milestone for a family company. Most family companies kind of peter out, after 2 or 3 generations. So I'm in the 4th generation of the family company. And believe it or not, there's 20 members of the 4th generation of my generation that are currently working in our business in some capacity. And we are really excited about, our prospects and everything we're doing. We own properties in about 14 states in the United States. The majority of our portfolio is in Utah. As you can see, we have 147 properties in Utah, 200 overall. And in private equity terms, we have a portfolio that's about $2.5 billion in assets under management that we've just built over time. We're very different than other real estate companies. A lot of real estate companies will buy properties and then flip them. Our mentality has been one that you buy properties and you hold them and you continue to redevelop them over the time. Property that most people are familiar with is University Place. If you're not spending lots of money and shopping at University Place right now, I encourage you to start doing so. It's my only kind of shameless plug. I will say that when it comes to University Place, malls all across the country are just completely under attack from a variety of different sources. And we're trying to do something really cool in Orem and at University Place to keep it viable. And we think we're having some success, but if you ever have feedback, please let us know. And to the extent you feel inclined to support University Place, we would love that because we're building it for you guys and we're building it for the community and really want to make sure that we're creating a place that people like to go and live and work and play. So I'm here today to talk about work ethic. And it's interesting, I always do kind of a last-minute search online to see if there's been any articles or news stories or something on work ethic that I can tie into my remarks. And I was shocked to find that the first 6 pages on Google, when they talked about work ethic, were talking about things like teamwork and having integrity and being goal-oriented. And the more I read it, I realized that they were trying to describe work ethic as work ethics, the ethics of work. And I feel like that's kind of a very millennial spin on an age-old concept of work ethic. But that's not the type, work ethics is not what I'm here to talk about today. What I'm here to talk about is hard work. What I'm here to talk about is people, and I may be able to go through them all by memory, but I'm just going to look up. Apple CEO Tim Cook gets there at 4:30 in the morning every morning. Everybody reports he's the first one into the office and the last one to leave. You've got Mark Cuban, the owner of Dallas Mavericks. Spent the first 7 years after he created a company and did not take a single vacation day. I love going on trips. I can't imagine spending 7 years without having a vacation day because I was working so much trying to get my first business to succeed. You've got Marissa Mayer, who routinely, when she was at Google prior to becoming Yahoo's CEO, pulled 130-hour weeks at Google. Now, when you think about that, if you're sleeping 5 hours a night, so 35 hours of sleep a night, I mean, she must have just been living at Google in order to pull 130-hour weeks while she was there. Or you take GE's CEO, who for 24 years put in 100-hour weeks at GE prior to being named CEO. Okay? So when I talk about work ethic, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ability to apply yourself for long periods of time, to focus on your work, to grow yourself, to gain experience. And this is a very important thing, both should be to you and both culturally in my company. And I think that in a way, I didn't realize as I was growing up how many examples I had of work ethic in my life. I've got a picture here. Oh, I meant to say, and the reason I think it's most important for you, and hopefully you're hearing this a lot, but anytime President Holland or Dean Wright is talking about you guys, the thing they are telling the community is that UVU has the hardest working students of any university in the state. And I got to tell you, as a member of the community that's employing UVU students, we've bought into that. We have not yet had a bad experience with a UVU employee. We found them to have good work ethic. We've found them to be very capable. But you guys need to understand, for that brand to continue and to be perpetuated, it necessitates everybody in this room understanding that when they leave UVU, they've got to carry the banner for all those students who are hoping to find jobs in the future. They've got to be working hard, and they've got to make a good impression on the workplace, because at some point, the university president or the dean of the business school just telling everybody that you guys are great workers is going to fall short. And so that was the reason I wanted to talk about this today. So this is a picture. On the right-hand side is my great-uncle Orrin. On the left side is my grandpa, Wally. Orrin was an interesting guy. He unfortunately passed away about a year ago. And up until about 3 days before he died, he had a schedule where he was in the office about 60 hours a day. And so even like I said, 3 days before he died, he pulled like a 12-hour day, shortly before having a problem and going into the hospital and passing away. And I used to love to introduce people to Orrin, and I'd always do it the same way. I'd say, hey, Uncle Orrin, you work like 12 hours a day, don't you? And he'd go, no. He goes, I don't work 12 hours a day, Taylor, because I take at least an hour for lunch and dinner every day. And I loved doing that because he was trying to set me straight, but in the process he was confirming that he basically was sitting in his chair for 10 hours a day working in his 90s. And it was just a real inspiration. I mean, all growing up, I could go to the office pretty much any time and he would be there working. And I'll tell you, the funny thing is the only day he didn't do that work was on Sunday, but he kept the exact same schedule on Sunday. He just did it doing family history at his computer as opposed to working on work stuff. But he had a clear dividing line. He didn't want to work on Sunday, so that was a day for him to do his family history work. My grandpa Wally, my first job, I was 13 years old, and my grandpa Wally hired me to come work for the company, basically as his assistant doing filing for him. And we don't put a ton of stock in child labor laws in our family company. My son's almost 13, and my dad said, hey, I'd like to have Ethan start coming into the office, this summer. And I'm going, yep, that's about right. So I worked for my grandpa, and I'd work 8 to 5. And the thing I didn't realize until I started thinking back on my experience, but he would have a huge stack of things for me to do when I came in the office first thing in the morning. And by 5 o'clock, I'd pretty much exhausted the stack. And without fail, I'd get back into the office the next morning, and there'd be another huge stack of things for me to work on. And it was almost like a fairy was delivering this stack of work for me to do every day. But as I think back on it, that meant that my grandpa, after I was leaving at 5, was going through and continuing to work and developing a stack that would build up so that I would have something to do the next morning. Okay? So these are the types of experiences that I had growing up. I remember one time in high school I had to stay late because there was a project that I needed to get done, and I think I had a trip or something I was going on. And I was shocked to find multiple of my uncles and my grandpa and my great-uncle Orrin all still in the office working. And it's interesting, in our family, night times and weekends are times you don't talk to anybody. You just kind of silently go about your work. Because for us, that's like the only time during the day we feel like we can get peace and quiet just to focus on what we want to do. And so no one usually talks, but we all know that we're there. We all know that everybody's still in the office and everybody's still working. And these were the types of experiences I grew up with. But yet, even though these were the experiences I had growing up, I got to college and I still had really no perspective of what work ethic was or what would be expected of me coming out of college. And so it wasn't until I started having some friends start to get jobs and I started seeing their experience that I started realizing that I had never understood how many hours some people work to be successful and to get ahead. And if this is stuff that you already know, hey, I'm already planning to leave college and I'm already planning to put in 80 hours a week, that's a 16-hour day, if anybody's curious, then this maybe isn't for you. But when I was in college, I did not have the perspective to know how hard people were working out there. So this first one is an interesting one. This is James was an intern that I had a couple of years ago. And I found James to be pretty impressive. I get his resume, and I'm reading through it, and I'm interviewing him, and I'm saying, okay, so you're going to school full-time? He said, yeah. He goes, I'm taking 18-hour course load every semester, and I've got about a 3.9 GPA. And I'm going, okay, that's good. And it says here you're working full-time at Wells Fargo? He said, yeah, I work full-time at Wells Fargo. I said, well, when do you find time to do that? He said, well, I found a job at Wells Fargo where I can man a help desk, that I get calls infrequently, so I can do some of my studying at night, but I start at 10 p.m. and I work till 6 a.m. in the morning. And so I try to do all of my schoolwork starting like 8 a.m. classes so that I get some sleep usually in the afternoon after I've worked all night and I've gone to school all day. And I said, but are you going to quit your job at Wells Fargo to take this internship with Woodbury? He said, no. He goes, I think I can fit it in. And I'm going, you think you can fit it in? I said, when do you think you can fit it in? And we're kind of talking about this. And I finally said, look, I don't want you to commit to something you can't do. So please go home. The job's yours if you really want it. But go home and really think through, is this something you think you can accomplish? And so the next morning, I get an email with this spreadsheet attached. And the line, I figured out a way to get 20 hours into my schedule. And so I want to draw your attention to a few things. So this was James's schedule. So all of these light blue columns with SL, those are his sleep times. And I was a little alarmed to see that Friday he was only getting 1 hour of sleep. But he felt confident that he could catch up on the weekends and that wasn't going to be a problem, okay? So he had his work schedule, 5 days a week, basically getting about 40 hours a week. He had 39 on the schedule here. He figured out he still had time for his church stuff. I'm guessing he had some Wednesday commitments and then also, time on Sunday. He had some personal time for his wife on Saturday, which I was relieved to see that he had. He didn't have any kids, so he didn't have to worry about that, but did have a wife. And he had worked out a way to get 23 hours of internship time, basically on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So this was the spreadsheet I got back from James, explaining to me how he was sure he could get 20 hours of time at least a week in this internship. And I called him back and said, James, are you sure? He goes, no, I really want to do this, I'm sure. And sure enough, he did that internship for about 6 months, and he managed to keep this schedule without 6 months. And he never once didn't show up on time. He never once was not alert and attentive and actively engaged while he was there. Pretty unique kid that worked pretty hard. Artie, my brother, so he, much smarter than I am, went to great schools, went to University of Pennsylvania, went to a school in Paris called Sciences Po, landed his first job at Goldman Sachs in London. And his average schedule was about an 80-hour week at Goldman Sachs. He would start, he said, between 8 and 9 in the morning. He would usually go, about 14 hours in the day, so he would go till about 10 o'clock at night, sometimes midnight. But he admitted that there were days where he was staffed on deals where he had to work well over 100 hours a week, And he said, he goes, it was hard because, at Goldman, the culture was the vice presidents would give you a bunch of work and then they'd all check out about 7 o'clock. But you were expected to have everything done by the next morning when the vice presidents got back into the office. And he said to me, he goes, in Taylor, he goes, I wasn't even one of the investment bankers. The investment bankers had it way worse than I did. I mean, I got away with just working 80 hours a week in that job. I said, 80 hours a week? I said, well, how'd you do it? And he said, well, he goes, it's 14 hours a day, every day of the week. And then, usually you put in a good block of time on the weekends, and it wasn't that hard. You could pretty much do it. I was going, okay. Next example, a friend of mine from law school, Sheldon. Sheldon has got to be one of the hardest working individuals I've ever met. The hard thing on Sheldon's story, he got a job right out of law school at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That required him to work about 60 hours a week. But that doesn't tell the whole story on Sheldon. Sheldon had, depending on traffic, about a 45 to 90-minute commute each way to get to and from his job right out of law school. And on top of that, he had 3 kids at the time, had a 4th while he was working at the job, and had significant church responsibilities that, who's to say, but in my opinion, fulfilled with distinction. And that was in addition to his 60-hour job. And he was living in D.C., I was living in Salt Lake. I'd send him emails sometimes at like midnight, and I'd get immediate responses from him because he was still up working and reading cases and doing things that he was supposed to be doing for his job. Next, another friend from law school, Chris, got a job right out of law school at a law firm called Cravath. Cravath has a really interesting culture. They basically attach you at the hip to another attorney, and you follow that attorney around for 6 months and do all of his grunt work, essentially. And so it's a great top law firm in the country. Chris averaged somewhere between 60 and 80 hours a week working for Cravath. Cravath is an interesting place because they bring all the meals into the company. They do dry cleaning. They'll run errands for you. They have hotel rooms booked across the street, so you don't have to go home. You can just jump across the street for a quick nap and get back to work. Everything they can do to keep you in the office and working and billing time at that law firm and keep you engaged. So, Chris, wasn't on partner track. If you're on partner track at Cravath, you've got to be over 100 hours a week and living in the hotel, basically never having a life outside of the law firm. But Chris never thought he was on partner track. He just wanted to work there for about 4 years. So he did his 80 hours a week for 4 years before getting a job in Dallas and has just recently made partner in that law firm. David, last example. So this is my best friend from undergraduate at GW. And David landed a job at Goldman Sachs, which coming from GW is like an impossible job to get. Goldman Sachs in New York, in their international economic division, he got a job as an analyst. And he was kind of looked down on. I mean, if you're not coming from Harvard or Yale or Princeton, it's really hard to get a job at Goldman Sachs to start with. And so if you're coming from one of these, in their mind, second-tier universities, you're already starting a step behind. And so David was convinced that the only way he could get ahead was to work really hard and be successful. So David easily put in 80 hours a week at Goldman Sachs, sometimes 100 hours a week, and managed to do that for 3 years. Got the nickname in his team of being Productivity's Miracle. They called him PM all the time because he would just sit in a chair and he would just work and work and work. And as a result of that experience, even though he came from GW, he landed a job on a trading desk, which was his dream job, and eventually became a vice president at Goldman Sachs because of how hard he worked those first 3 years and how productive he was. And the funny thing is he would get employees, analysts that would come work for him, that were always just shocked. How did you get here from GW? Because they're coming from Harvard, they're coming from Princeton. They could not understand how he got there. And I know, because I was friends with him and living through it with him, how hard he worked to get here where he was. So, why is work ethic important? Okay? Well, what I want you to understand, the perspective I'm hoping I'm giving you, I'm not trying to brag about these people, and these are obviously exceptional people. I sent a survey out to a lot of my friends who I went to school with in undergraduate and graduate school, and there were plenty of my friends out there who were only working 40 to 50 hours a week. Okay? But in my mind, these are exceptional people that are on tracks right now to be extremely successful in their chosen fields and are very, very well respected in what they're doing. And I wanted to use them as examples to show you that you need to understand that there are people, your peers, that will graduate the exact same time you will, that are doing this to get ahead and are doing this to be successful. Okay? The guy who's the future CEO of GE, that might be graduating the exact same year you are. He's planning to graduate school and go spend 100 hours a week in the office so that he can one day be the CEO of a major corporation and be successful. And I tell you, I'm not trying to weigh in on the debate of CEO compensation, but doesn't it change your mind a little bit when you think about, okay, these guys are making millions of dollars a year, but this is a guy that spent 100 hours a week for 24 years of his life, growing and developing and becoming a better person so that he could be successful in his job in the future. And in my mind, that changes things a little bit. And so I want you to have perspective of what people are doing and what people are trying to make themselves do so that they can be successful. Okay? So a couple of specifics on why it's important to have work ethic. Okay, number one, you can outwork smart people. Okay, my friend David, he outworks smart people. He didn't get into Harvard. Okay, we both got into GW. We're excited to be at GW. Only found out we were second-class citizens once we got out of GW. And there's some crazy class system that exists on the East Coast with where you went to school, right? But smart people a lot of times take a lot of things for granted. And you can always outwork them. This really came true for me when I was in law school. I went to GW for law school as well, and I get there. At the time, GW was like a top 20 school, so there were a lot of smart people that went there, and I was just blown away at how smart some of the people were that were in my classes. People that didn't have to study hard, people that could read the book once and had internalized everything and didn't need to study it again. I was not one of those people. And I'll never forget being matched up against two people that I was just terrified of because of how brilliant they were in a competition, in a moot court competition. And I just decided, you know what, I'm going to know this so well that I'm going to win this. And what I learned is you can outwork smart people. As smart as I think my brother Artie is, he would tell you the same thing. The reason he was successful is he was willing to work harder than anybody else, any of his classmates, any of his peers at Goldman. And so you got to remember, you can outwork smart people if you put your mind to it. Why you work hard? It makes you proficient faster. If you're developing yourself 40 hours a week versus 80 hours a week, that means you're getting twice as much development in any given week. And if you're anxious about leaving school and getting to the point where you're going to be productive and successful quicker, the way to do that is to apply yourself and to grow yourself for more time every week. Okay, it's doable. You can do it. People are doing it. Your peers at other schools are going to be doing it. You have to be willing to apply yourself, and if you do that, you will progress much, much faster than the people who aren't putting in the time. Yeah, there's always going to be those people that are naturally gifted. But I promise you, like I said on the previous slide, you can outwork them, and you can grow yourself faster than what those people are doing. Okay? And what you will find is you will be amazed at your ability to accomplish. Okay, I had this funny anomaly pop up as I was looking back over my undergraduate career in college. So I played varsity water polo when I was at GW, and my first semester of every academic year was a total nightmare. I had 3 hours of practice a night, the maximum that's allowed by the NCAA. What they don't tell you is then you spend an hour in the training room before and after those practices getting ready and then trying to recover from what you just went through. And then Friday morning we'd board a bus and we'd be gone Friday, Saturday, Sunday playing games pretty much every weekend of the first semester. And there was this crazy thing that happened. I looked back over my experience from my 4 years at GW. I had a higher GPA the first semester of every academic year than I had in the second semester of every academic year. And maybe you've had something similar where you've noticed this. At points in time in your life when you are so busy, you are just that much more focused. You don't waste time. You get things done because you absolutely have to. And I didn't even realize that was happening with me until I got to the end of my experience at GW and went, my heck, how did I get higher grades in the middle of water polo season for 4 years than I did in the next one? And I know it's because I wasted time. I only had 2 hours a day to study some days. I had to get into the library, I had to sit down, and I had to knock it out. Whereas in the spring semester, I had all the time in the world, it felt like, and I would procrastinate and I would goof around and I wouldn't get stuff done. So if you apply yourself, if you put yourself in a position where you're going to make yourself extremely busy, you will find ways, you'll get creative and you'll find ways to accomplish way more than you ever thought possible. So a couple of closing thoughts at this point. I've talked a lot about work ethic and why it's important, but I want to put at this point a little perspective on work ethic, because so far I've defined success as people who are becoming financially successful or successful in their job, and I don't want to leave you with that impression that work ethic is just about getting ahead in the workplace and being a really successful professional going forward. So this is my favorite Dilbert comic. I use this as much as I can because it resonates so much with me personally. I'll just read this if anybody can't read it. So the intern comes to Alice. Alice, do you have any valuable career advice? Well, work so hard that it destroys your health and crowds out any chance of having a personal life. Well, wouldn't that make me unhappy? Well, you didn't ask for happiness advice. Okay? So this really does resonate with me. And what I'm not saying is that you have to do this. I'm not saying that you can't have a chance for a personal life. I'm not saying that you can't prioritize different things or find things that make you happy. Okay? What I am saying is you have to work hard. And you should be prepared at this point in your life, more than any other point, you should be prepared the second you leave this school to hit the ground running and work harder than you ever have in your life, okay? Just because you leave school, it's not the time to stop learning. It's not the time to stop growing. If anything, all school's done, and all the school did for me up until this point in my life, is put me in a position where I had the capacity to move to a higher level of education, move to a higher level of experience, and start to really grow personally more than I ever had before, okay? And that's the thing you have to realize, okay? I'm not saying you have to push just on career. You can push in any direction you want, but you've got to realize that it really becomes hard from this point forward in your life, and you've got to be ready to assert yourself. So my grandfather had an experience where my dad was talking to him. I think my dad was complaining about something that happened from a pay standpoint on a project he'd been working on, how hard he'd worked. And my grandpa kind of turned to him and scoffed and said, you know, Jeff, I've never worked a day in my life for money. And as I think back on my grandpa's experience, that was really true. Part of the reason that I've had relatives that were such prodigious workers is because we genuinely love what we're doing. Nothing gives me more satisfaction than working for my family and growing my family and growing, protecting my family. I mean, that's what gets me up every morning. I love real estate development too. I think building communities and being able to look back on buildings and things you've done that change people's lives for the better is extremely rewarding. But for all of us in the family, I know people feel the same way. We all are passionate about growing the business, growing the legacy that's been left for us, and participating in Woodbury Corporation. And so from that perspective, I don't think anybody can just do it by force of will. I don't think you can go in and say, I hate my job, but I'm going to do this for the next 24 years. Like, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. And so it's so important to find things you're passionate about so that you can really apply yourself and work hard. And lastly, this is, I think, kind of the closing thought I'd leave with you. You don't, as I was saying earlier, you don't have to work hard just in business, okay? That's not the purpose of my talk about work, or my lecture about work ethic here today. You need to find something that you're going to apply yourself in, and you need to work hard in that. For me, I spent a number of years after I got back from school putting in long hours and working hard. I'd seen all the examples of my friends, I'd seen the examples from my family members, and I was prepared to just come back and do that. But what I realized is I wasn't having the full life that I wanted. There was things I wanted that just weren't happening. So I started figuring out ways to round out my life and have a better experience. For me, the first thing I did is I started signing up to coach every kid's sport that I could. Okay? I don't know that I'm that great of a soccer coach. I mean, I played when I was 10. I don't know if that qualifies me necessarily to coach soccer, but I wanted to program in time so that I was making sure to spend time with my kids, making sure to spend time with my family. And if I had a commitment to coach a team, that required me to be out of the office, coaching. That required me to be there on Saturdays. Most recently, I've started coaching water polo at Olympus High School, and I've become a part of a program. I've done that for 3 years, and I'm just loving it. It takes me about 10 to 12 hours a week. It's not something that I aspire to become a professional water polo coach or anything, but I'm taking classes and I'm going to clinics and I'm growing myself as a coach, and I'm taking my kids to California, and I'm applying myself and putting hopefully the same work ethic that I may or may not have in the workplace, applying that to my coaching water polo. And as a result, myself and a couple other coaches, we're growing a pretty cool program. We've got over 100 kids in our program now. We're so excited to see this growth and see this progress of our kids in this program. We've got kids that are on made the Olympic development team, here this last year, and it's so gratifying to see that. And I think what I'm trying to say is you can work hard on what's most important to you. If what's most important to you is your family, okay, take that same work ethic that you would have otherwise placed in the workplace and bring that to your family life. If the only thing you're passionate about is golf, okay, work hard in golf. But put yourself in a position where you decide what's most important to you and apply yourself so that you're working hard and you're not letting yourself off the hook. Okay, 40 hours a week is not the standard, and it's, again, not what your peers are doing. It's not what your peers are going to be doing. And those people that you look at 20 years from now and go, man, how did they get so successful? I can almost guarantee you that the way they got successful was a long trail of working hard and developing themselves right as they got out of college. So with that, happy to answer any questions anybody has, both on this or Woodbury Corp or anything you're curious about. Yeah?
Do you believe that work ethic is either you have it or you don't type of thing? And if not, how do you develop work ethic in others around you?
So absolutely not a you have it or you don't. I consider myself to be one of the laziest people I've ever met in my life. Okay, I mean I am so inherently lazy that it just like pains me sometimes that I don't have kind of more natural instinct or killer instinct to get out there and go and do. Okay, the funny thing is, and I've joked with another cousin about this, that I think my laziness almost becomes an advantage because I'm like constantly trying to find the quicker, easier way to do something. Like I refuse just to be told, oh, this is how you do it, and do it that way. So I'd like to think I'm almost making my laziness a little bit of a benefit, but I can assure you that, you know, willpower is something that anybody can build. Willpower is something that anybody can develop over time, and you just have to start to apply yourself. My father always talked about his experience in law school, that you know, he realized very early on that success in law school really boils down to one thing: who can put their butt in a seat and can sit there and read longest. And that's really what it is. The person who consumes the most information a lot of times ends up being the person who has the facts they need to pass the law exam. And that's what it takes. It takes, you know, putting your butt in a seat and working. It takes, if you graduate and you only have a 40-hour-a-week job, and we've hired accountants from UVU, I can't have them working 80 hours because I can't afford the overtime, right? I mean, if you have a 40-hour-a-week job, that's fine. But what are you doing with the rest of your time? Where are you getting further academic degrees? Are you applying yourself to a nonprofit organization? Are you applying yourself to your family? I think the key is just staying focused on what your goals are and making sure that you're not allowing yourself to slack off. That's my opinion, at least. Yeah?
How do you find balance between work, family, and other obligations?
I find it difficultly. I think that the best answer to that is it's a constant thing you have to just keep evaluating and making sure that you're not getting complacent in any one area. For me, I feel very grateful that I have a wife that is constantly, you know, on me about, well, have you spent time with the kids today? When are you going to go do this? You know, Ethan wants you to go take him to this thing. When are you going to do this? And I feel like I've constantly had kind of obligations thrust on me that maybe weren't obvious to me from my wife that's really helped me, you know, over the years, okay? But I think the key thing is just to always be in a position where you're taking inventory of your life and seeing where you are and seeing if you're happy and figuring out if you're neglecting one of the areas in your life. You know, there's been times where, you know, my wife has said, hey, you know, I don't think you've spent enough time with the kids this week, and I have to say to my wife, well, actually, you know, I coached, you know, 10 hours or 12 hours of water polo practices this week, and we went to a tournament, and I was with the kids the entire time. So you're right, I haven't had the time to maybe sit down and play video games or, you know, take them out to dinner or something, but I think I've actually spent quite a bit of time with the kids. But I try to listen when she's saying that stuff, and I try to be self-reflective, and hopefully I'm moving in the right direction. But it's one of those things, I think that, you know, you always wish you could do more. And I think the key thing, I mean, the thing for me was just eventually programming in time where I was for sure going to be spending time with my kids, where I was going to for sure be doing other things outside of work so that I was covering all those bases. Yeah?
Did you have any hesitancies working for a family-run business? And if so, what were the advantages and disadvantages of currently still working for a family?
Yeah, so, you know, so I will admit that I have been brought to tears more time in my adult life than I ever thought possible because I'm working for a family business. Because for some reason, I've been chewed out by coaches and bosses without ever being affected, but when your dad is just like screaming at you because you did something wrong, it's always been hard for me to bear. And I think for me, that was the toughest thing about going back to work at a family business is I internalize, this is just me, I take things so personally when my uncles or my dad, and unfortunately, it's sort of a cultural thing and it's sort of just a generational thing, but I have a lot of yellers in my family and people who like to, assert themselves by raising their voices, right? So I definitely had apprehensions about going back to work for my family because I did not want to end up resenting members of my family because of my association with them through the business. I will say, though, that the thing that's just been absolutely miraculous to me since I've been back full-time from school is that, we as a family don't have a lot of like problem individuals that are causing a lot of contention. I mean, most people in my family, for whatever reason, everybody's doing their job. We don't have issues with people not pulling their weight. Everybody is anxiously engaged. Everybody's trying to do the right thing and trying to uphold, the family reputation. I mean, we're far from perfect, but it has ended up being so gratifying for me to see both my brothers and my sister all work in the family business. I get to see them every day. I sat down in Artie's office right before coming here to talk to him about something, and we were laughing about his time at Goldman because I said I was going to bring it up. I mean, it is so much fun to be with your family in that capacity. And it's not for everybody, and I get that. I study family businesses, and I know how many family businesses have broken up. But at the same time, if you can make it work with your family, it is, I think, one of the most rewarding experiences that you could possibly have, because the people that you love most, being able to spend time with them and being able to work with them and solve problems together just ends up being a lot of fun. But all that being said, I think often about whether I want to encourage my kids to come back and work in the family business, because I know it's not for everybody, and it definitely has its pluses and minuses. But by and large, I'm so grateful for the opportunities I've been given, and I love what I do. So for me, it's worked, and it's what I've always wanted to do, but I want to make sure my kids are making their own choice, that this is something I want to do, that they're not feeling like they're forced to come back. Yeah, in the back.
Got a question for you about what you do to, obviously you can't work 100% of the time, so what are the things, just as a personal question, that you do to kind of just take a break from work? Some people it's, get on social media, some people it's watch TV. What is it that you do to kind of unwind, and how much time do you spend doing that?
Sure. So one of the reasons I've really latched on to coaching water polo, I mean, I love doing that. That's been something that when I'm, I coach basically kids that are like, 9 years old to 14 years old, right? So I've got just like great age range. I don't have to deal with teenage problems. The kids are really excited to be there. And that's been something for me that since I found it has just been an enormous release for me to be able to go. I forget about what's happening at work. I focus on water polo. Sometimes I get in the water with the kids. It's just a blast. I mean, it's such a fun thing for me to coach. The other thing I found just for me is that I found that if I'm doing something with my hands, it allows me just to completely tune out what's going on. The thing I've been doing most recently is, funny enough, is wire weaving. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Passengers, and he creates that wedding ring out of all the wires he finds on the spaceship. I was like, I wonder how hard that is. So I got a couple books, and I got a whole bunch of copper wire, and I've been learning how to wire weave just kind of randomly, right? And it's been so great because it's something that's like very meticulous and engaging with my hands, and I can sit down and do that for a couple hours at night and have something cool that I created and realize that I've kind of just left the world behind as I do that. So I think finding that stuff is so important, like you suggested. I tried. My dad is like an avid golfer. That's been his release. I just am so bad at golf. I'm just ashamed to my father, that I can't golf better after all the experience I've had. And he tries to take me to these great courses all over the world, and I just am horrible. And lying about my handicap to even get me on the course in the first place, and then I don't, I live up to my real handicap. So everybody in my family, I think, finds their outlet or how they deal with things, and I think that's really important. So those are some of the things I've done. Yeah.
What are your top 3 books
top 3 books. So I'll give you a couple that I've read. I'm reading just recently. So the When Genius Fails was a fascinating book to me. The Rise and Fall of Long-Term Capital Management. If you haven't read that yet, I just read it for the first time recently, and I thought that was just a fascinating book to read. I really like. Just recently, I'd never as a kid read anything by Brandon Sanderson. And I actually found the second 3 books in his Mistborn series to be really cool and pretty neat. I mean, those are just, fiction books, and, he's like a fantasy writer, but I thought those were cool. And then I'm trying to remember the name of the book that just read about the Enron scandal. What was it? It wasn't Pipe Dreams, no. I'll try and remember. It might come to me in a second, but I just read a book that kind of walked through the the whole Enron scandal and everything that happened with that, and it's so fascinating. I enjoy reading. I think for some reason I have this like kind of sick fascination with businesses blowing up because I really want to avoid that, especially in the next 11 months. We got to get to 100 years, but I think that it's so interesting to me to see, where people were blind and where people weren't paying attention, and what they did to, miss warning signs, or how they, didn't see the coming collapse, because it ends up being very self-reflective for me about, behaviors I might have or things we're doing in our company that we need to change. So I've been on a failed business kick lately. Yeah.
How do you keep motivating yourself? Because obviously working 100 hours is a long time, or even 50, 60 hours. How do you motivate yourself to keep working?
It's I think it's a lot of things. I think it's another positive of family business is you have people you really care about that you don't want to let down, and so for me, I think a lot of it stems back to that. Obviously, having a family and wanting to be in a position where you're, positioning your kids to do what they want, and, providing them opportunities and experiences and having a good life helps. But, I don't know what my answer would be to that. I think that, I think those things are probably what keeps me going, but I thought about that a lot more before I started working than once I got into it. Since I've been in it, so far I've been able to just kind of keep pushing forward, and there's always the next project, there's always the next fight with the city that, we're going through, and so, you kind of just keep moving to the next thing, and hopefully you're liking what you're doing and it keeps you engaged. Yeah?
So you said that you're naturally a lazy person. What are some recommendations you give, things people can change in their lives to kind of start the transition from being lazy to being dedicated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've kind of hinted at this a couple times, but the thing that's worked best for me is really scheduling my time and having integrity with the schedule I create. That's why, for me, some days there's nothing I wanted more than just to go home and turn on the TV, but it's oh gosh, I've got soccer practice. But I was so grateful after I'd gone and done the soccer practice and goofed around with my kids, for an hour, that I had that scheduled and that was in my thing. So, my schedule is a little weird. I've always been a night owl. I like staying up late. So, I will leave stuff that I have to get done for the next day, and say, okay, by 9 o'clock I've got to be back in the office, or I've got to be sitting down in front of my computer again. And that gives me a good 3 or 4 hour block to hang out with my family and have dinner and drive them to swimming or whatever we're doing, and then I've got kind of a schedule I got to keep so I can do it. So I think more than anything for me, getting to the point where I had a defined schedule that I was keeping has kind of kept me marching forward. And then once you're there, it's just keeping yourself engaged, getting in the zone, and kind of doing it.
I know your talk's on work ethic, but you just mentioned integrity. Could you tell the story about your grandfather and golfing?
Yeah. So Tom had told me he wanted me to tell this story again, but so my grandfather, Woodbury Corporation, started kind of as a residential real estate brokerage, and my grandfather was doing some brokerage work, but nothing on a grand scale, okay? And so he was playing in a golf tournament, Salt Lake Country Club, and he was neck and neck with this doctor from Chicago. And they were playing, and my grandfather was up by 1 stroke. They get to the 18th hole, and my grandfather hits his second shot, and it lands on the side of a hill, kind of on the side of the green. And the doctor, hit his ball on. And my grandfather went down, and he took a swing at his ball on the side of the hill and completely missed the ball. And for those of you who are golfers, if you completely missed the ball, if you took a real swing at it, that counts as a stroke. So my grandfather took his second swing, knocked it right up on the green, putted in. Should have won the tournament if he'd done that the first time. But when the doctor came over to congratulate him, he said, "No, I got a 6 on this hole, not a 5. We have to go to a playoff." And the doctor said, "Well, how'd you get a 6?" And he's counting out the strokes. And my grandfather's saying, "No, I took a swing when I was down there on the side of the hill and I missed the ball." And the doctor said, "Oh, come on, nobody counts that." And my grandfather said, "Yeah, I count that. Let's go to the playoff." And my grandfather ended up losing in the playoff. And, great-grandfather. My great-grandfather didn't think much of it until a couple weeks later, he got a call from a gentleman from Standard Oil who wanted to engage my great-grandfather to build an oil refinery, or at least assemble the land for an oil refinery in North Salt Lake. It's that lovely eyesore that's still there today, unfortunately. And so my great-grandfather was obviously really excited to get this call from Standard Oil. I mean, it was a huge commission, a huge deal for him at that point in his career. But he kind of said, "Hey, how did you know to call me? I mean, where did you get my name?" And the guy said to him, Mr. Rockefeller's brother-in-law is a doctor from Chicago. I think you met him in a golf tournament a couple weeks ago. And so he told us if we were ever doing something in Salt Lake that he'd met the most honest person he'd ever met in his life, and we should make sure to do business with him. And so, that little thing of my great-grandfather having integrity is what got him a huge jump in his early career. And this is this is another great thing about family businesses, back to your question, that there's so many stories and there's so many little things like that over the years that we kind of look back on and have as part of our oral tradition almost in our family business that keep all of us engaged and keep us excited to work there. And really, I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today without my family. My great-grandfather, what he did, my grandfather and my great-uncle, what they did, the members of the third generation, what they did. I mean, we've had a legacy of people, building a culture and building a company that I'm grateful to be a part of. And, I really wonder, given my kind of natural lazy nature, I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd not been, in a position where I've had so many good examples. But again, the thing I'd emphasize to you guys, remember that you guys will have peers your age that graduate at the exact same time that are doing the types of things like we talked about today. And I really hope, if nothing else, just remember how important it is to leave school or start right now, and start applying yourself in a way that's going to lead to you being successful. Because it takes a lot of hard work, and you need to make sure to start doing that now. Thank you.